The galaxy trembled as the announcement echoed across the stars. The Zorkai apex predators of the known universe had issued another challenge. The Death Arena was open again, and this time a new species was invited to prove its worth. Earth was not ready for first contact, not officially, but the signal came through all frequencies, broadcasting images of monsters, flame storms, and unending violence, an invitation encoded in a single line. Survive and earn respect, refuse and remain nothing. Humans watched the footage. Some laughed, others were horrified, but one group of volunteers stepped forward. Without hesitation, among them was a man named Jack, quiet, lean, with sharp eyes and hands that moved like they remembered every hard lesson from Earth's harshest places. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a scientist, he was something else. He was human, and that would be enough. Zorkai saw Earth's response and mocked at their media networks, called it adorable that a primitive planet thought it had anything to offer the Death World. No one had lasted more than 20 hours in the arena. Even the most advanced warlike species had fallen under its cruel tests. The galaxy watched for entertainment. They gathered in vast arenas linked through broadcast relays. Entire planets paused to witness the blood games. And this time the humans were the main act. When the humans arrived, Jack stepped off the transport, first breathing in the heavy sulfur air of the arena. The sky was cracked. In red and purple, lightning crawled across the clouds in silence. The ground shifted with distant roars. He didn't flinch. He simply looked up, smiled once, and started walking. The Death World was not just a battleground, it was a living thing designed to test the limits of survival. Sentient plants tried to grab him. Acid rain started to fall an hour after arrival, while other species scrambled to find shelter. Jack climbed a jagged cliff, using a vine to swing across a pit of molten ash. At the top he found a dry ledge and started building a fire using friction and stone. A simple flame came to life. The galaxy stared. Was this a joke? He had no plasma blades, no armor, just a backpack and a sharp mind. The Zorkai commentator scoffed. He won't last till night, they said. But when the sun dipped behind the broken horizon, Jack was still alive. Not just surviving, but thriving. Had made a spear out of metal shards and a long bone. He had set traps using nothing but instinct and materials at hand, and he had caught something, a razor beast, a creature that had ended 3 alien champions in past games. He didn't fight it head on. He lured it into a trap, using its own scent against it, snapped a tree branch and let it impale itself, then skinned it, cooked it, and used its thick hide to reinforce his shoes. This human was not just lucky, he was thinking, adapting, evolving, and every step he took was a lesson to the stars that maybe, just maybe, humans were not what they seemed. To sue her. In the command towers of the Zorkai homeworld, generals watched the feed, silent now. Not mocking, not laughing, just watching, closely analyzing his movements, his strategies, his silence. No words, no boasts, only action. Across the galaxy, more beings, tuned and drawn not to the gore, but to the mystery of this lone human warrior. Was it a trick? Was he modified, enhanced, or was this the true face of Earth's predators? And if this was just one man, what would happen if 1,000 more arrived? But Jack didn't care about the cameras, he didn't care about the games or the aliens watching. He was here for something else, something deeper. Maybe not even he could explain it fully. Survival was one thing, but to survive with purpose, to leave a message that was something more. When night fell, the arena grew colder than ice. Predators with heat vision slithered in the shadows, waiting to pounce. Jack set up heat decoys, using his fire and torn fabric, drawing them away from his camp, then slept with one eye open, hand on his spear, breathing slowly and listening to the planet around him. In the morning, a flying beast attacked. While he gathered water, it had wings like razors and a scream that shattered stone. It swooped down, claws reaching for his neck, but he rolled under a fallen branch, jabbed upward with the spear, and ended it in a single smooth motion, then stood still, watching its body twitch before dragging it back to camp. Every move calculated, every choice made with the precision of someone who had lived among both nature and danger. No, the galaxy was no longer laughing. They were leaning forward, eyes wide, voices quiet, watching the human who refused to die, refused to bow, refused to become another name on a long list of failures. Some alien children began copying his movements in play schools. Some elders began speaking of Earth with curiosity, not contempt. A shift was happening, and no one could stop it. Far above, in the black halls of the Zorkai Council, the High Warlord stared at the screen, narrowing his eyes. His claws tapped the steel throne once, slowly, then again. He turned to his advisors and spoke. Prepare something special for tomorrow. If the human wants a challenge, we shall give him something worthy. Let's see if Earth can survive what comes next. Stand on the Death World. Jack sat sharpening his spear, quietly looking at the stars, as if he knew what was coming and was already ready for it. Sky above the Death World cracked with new fury As the second day began with no mercy, the Zorkai Council had stayed up through the night, engineering a phase so brutal that no species had ever reached it, let alone survived. It was called the Gauntlet of Teeth, an unspoken level only rumored in old war tales, a field of monsters bred for one thing, and one thing only: to kill anything that moved. The crowd, gathered 10 times larger, now billions of aliens on every world, had tuned in to see the strange Earthling either fall or rise into legend. And as the first rays of red light touched the arena, Jack was already moving, already preparing, already thinking ahead, while most contestants would still be crawling away from nightmares or wounds. Jack stood calmly, tightening the hide straps on his armor made from creatures that once ruled this planet. Had not come to die. He had come to understand and to teach, and though he never said a word to the cameras, his actions spoke louder than 1,000 declarations. With every fire he built, with every beast he outsmarted, he was rewriting the way the galaxy viewed humanity. They had expected muscle or weapons, but what they got was something far more dangerous, someone who could see through the chaos and shape it to his advantage. Now, as the gauntlet gates opened, the creatures were released into the killing fields. 3 razor lions with horns of plasma, a pack of spine wolves that fed on pain, and worst of all, the whispering crawler, a shadow thing made of smoke and tentacles that melted the minds of most beings just by staring at them. The alien crowd screamed in bloodlust, while high lords placed bets, and some noble species turned away, unable to stomach what was to come. But Jack didn't run. He took his spear and slid into the long grass of the broken jungle, letting the wind carry his scent away. His eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in calculation, and when the razor lions passed, he struck not from rage, but from strategy. He had dug traps with sharpened bones buried deep in mud and covered them with leaves. The first lion screamed as it fell, thrashing wildly, its own weight driving spikes into its chest. The second roared and leaped at the human who rolled under it, using its momentum to guide it into a tree covered in poison thorns. And the third stared, confused, unsure how this small creature had undone 2 of its brothers before turning away and vanishing into the brush. Meanwhile, the spine wolves approached from the east, their cries like blades in the air, their smell like copper and blood. Jack stood still for several heartbeats, then reached into his pouch, pulling out a bottle of concentrated beast urine he had collected on day 1. He splashed it on a tree and climbed silently as the wolves arrived. They circled the scent marker and fought each other for territory, shredding their own pack. In a fury of madness, Jack waited until only one remained, then dropped down from above, driving his spear into its skull. Clean and fast. The crowd was no longer cheering. They were silent. Even the Zorkai general clenched his jaw. The human was not just surviving, he was controlling the battlefield, bending nature into tools and fear into weapons. No training program had predicted this, no simulations had prepared the galaxy for an Earthling like this. And yet Jack kept going, not because of hate, not because of ego, but because deep inside him was a belief that someone had to stand. When others ran, someone had to rise. When the strong pushed others down. And then the whispering crawler arrived, its form more idea than flesh, black smoke, with twitching red eyes and long writhing arms that touched the minds of all creatures around it, sending waves of panic, sorrow, and regret. The alien cameras glitched as it passed. Light bent around it. Screams echoed from the control rooms. Even spectators watching from home collapsed in fear. But Jack moved slow, breathing deeply, steadying himself, as if he had faced his own demons long before this moment. He closed his eyes and walked toward the beast, whispering something to himself, something no mic could catch. And when he opened his eyes again, the crawler hesitated, its limbs shaking, confused. Perhaps for the first time sensing not fear, but calm, Jack hurled a burning jar of sap into its center, lighting the creature with a fire. It did not expect it, screamed a soundless cry, and lashed out, but Jack was already gone, rolling under a broken log, slicing at its legs with a bone knife carved from the jaw of a scream vulture. And with a final leap, he drove his weapon into the eye of the thing, twisting it until it burst into sparks and smoke. The Zorkai Council stood frozen, no words, no laughter, no commands, only silence. And in that silence something shifted. The crowd began to chant, not for violence, not for death, but for life, for survival, for the human who would not break. And deep beneath the arena, in a sealed chamber, the supreme Zorkai warlord stood and whispered, "Prepare the blood ritual phase if he wants to teach us something. Then let him face the darkest truths of our history." And up above, under the fading sun, Jack sat again, sharpening his blade, using pieces of the defeated to build what came next. And beside him now sat a small creature, a survivor from a fallen species that had watched him from the shadows. It stepped forward, holding out food with shaking hands, and Jack accepted it with a nod, saying nothing but meaning everything. For in that moment a bond was formed, not between warriors or monsters, But between hope and understanding and across the galaxy, old fears began to crack. Just a little letting in the light of something new, something unstoppable, something. Human's sun never truly set on the death world, it only dipped behind clouds thick with ash and fire, turning the sky into a molten bruise above the endless jungle. Jack didn't sleep that night. His hands stayed busy carving new weapons from shattered bones and twisted metal, while the small alien creature he had saved named Vic watched in silence, trying to understand this human who had no claws, no scales, no venom, and yet kept surviving. Where monsters failed, Vic's people were known as the Lunari, small thinkers, engineers, quiet observers, not warriors. But after their champion died early in the arena, Vic had been left behind, too weak to run, too scared to fight. He would have died if Jack hadn't pulled him from a collapsing burrow. And since then he followed the human like a shadow, trying to understand what made him different. At dawn, a new message was burned across the sky in red lightning. The blood ritual phase begins. It was not a game anymore, not even for the Zorkai. The blood ritual was sacred. It was older than their empire, a challenge once used to crown their warlords, a rite soaked in the history of genocide and pain. And now they had unleashed it on a single human, hoping to crush the myth before it grew wings and spread across the stars. They dropped ancient relics into the arena, black stone obelisks that pulsed with red energy, and from them rose the blood beasts, creatures made from memories and screams shaped by pain and fire. They did not bleed, they did not sleep, they only consummated. Vic trembled as the ground split open and a figure emerged. It looked like something from a nightmare, a humanoid figure with no face, made of writhing tendrils and red crystal veins. Its arms ended in hooks and it moved without sound. It wasn't a monster, it was fear itself. Jack stood slowly, spear in hand, eyes narrowed, not blinking, not moving, as the thing approached. And just before it struck, he whispered to Vic, "Hide and stay hidden, no matter what happens." Then he charged forward, not with rage, but with purpose. His first strike was a test, a slice across the beast's side that revealed nothing, no flesh, no weakness, only smoke and sparks. Thing countered with a screamless swing, cutting through a tree like paper. Jack ducked, rolled, and struck again, then again, trying different angles, watching how it reacted, learning its rhythm like a dance, not of beauty, but of survival. And as he fought, Vic watched, and something shifted in the small creature's heart. He was no longer afraid, he was in awe, because for the first time, he saw that courage was not about being stronger, it was about standing when you had every reason to fall. The fight lasted for hours. The sun climbed high. The blood beast kept coming, each time faster, more violent, more clever. But so did Jack. He set traps of flame and smoke. He carved symbols on the ground stolen from the obelisks, using their own power against them. He baited the beast into a tight canyon, then collapsed the roof, burying it under rocks and bones. But it didn't stay buried. It rose again, howling in silence. And now it was changing, growing wings that shimmered with darkness, claws that dripped with burning ice. And Jack knew this was not just a fight for survival. This was a message from the Zorkai, a message that said, "Stay in your place, human. This is our arena, our galaxy, our rule of it." Jack didn't care about messages, he cared about life. He cared about he cared about the silent billions, watching and wondering if they too could stand, if they too could fight back. And in that moment he realized he needed more than a spear, more than tricks, he needed truth. So he dropped his weapon, stepped forward, arms wide, and faced the creature. Without fear, the blood beast screamed, its blade arm swung. But just before contact, Jack roared a single word, not in English, not in any known tongue, but something older, something buried in the bones of every human. And somehow the beast paused, it twitched, it shuddered, and then it cracked from the inside, red light pouring from its seams until it shattered into dust. Vic ran from his hiding place, mouth open, eyes wide, asking, "What did you do? How did you stop it?" And Jack looked at him and said, "I reminded it of something stronger than fear, something no ritual can control. I showed it memory, real memory, pain and love and loss, all mixed together, not created in a lab, not summoned from stones, but lived and earned and felt." And somehow the galaxy heard him, though the cameras had long since been destroyed. The message traveled in whispers and echoes in the stunned silence of the Zorkai command rooms, in the trembling voices of aliens who had once mocked humans and now sat in reverence. Council met in secret, now their plans unraveling, their pride burning. They had called humans weak, soft, unevolved, but now they saw a truth that chilled their ancient bones. Humans did not fight like predators, they fought like survivors, and survivors were the most dangerous of all because they didn't stop. They didn't surrender, they adapted, they endured. And now one of them had broken the blood ritual, a rite that had stood for 10,000 years, shattered by a man with a spear and a scream. As night fell again, Jack and Vic sat by the fire, the small alien offering a piece of dried meat. And Jack accepted it with a smile. He didn't say much, he never did, but his eyes said everything. and above them in the dark sky stars began to shift, as if the universe itself had taken notice of what had just happened. And somewhere far away, another race saw the footage replayed, and for the first time in their history, they whispered, maybe we should speak to Earth with respect, not because they can kill, but because they choose not to unless they have no other choice. Save said. No right. Part 4. And part 4 will be minimum 800 words more unique without dots and small line checked said. The sky above the death world turned the color of burning copper as the fourth trial began with a storm unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Before lightning forked in silence across the dark clouds, the rain that fell was not water, but oil laced with acid and fire, and yet through it all Jack moved without hesitation, his boots wrapped in beast hide, his eyes shielded with a visor. He carved from the shell of a sky mantis, his body burned from the battle with the blood beast. But his soul burned hotter. The arena had become something else now, not just a stage for survival, but a battlefield of ideas, where one human had begun to shift the minds of an entire galaxy. Beside him Vec trembled, trying to light a fire as the storm soaked the wood, but Jack leaned and placed two stones together, and with a spark summoned flame from soaked bark, and smoke rose between them, dancing upward like a flag raised in defiance. The Zorkai had watched the last battle. With growing fury, their warlords argued in low voices, their generals rewrote simulations. None of them could understand how the blood beast was defeated, so they blamed error, blamed the terrain, blamed anything but the truth. And then they agreed on the next phase. The day the sky burned, it was not just an attack but a punishment, a firestorm, summoned from orbit using ancient satellites to rain molten metal across the jungle, to boil the rivers, to destroy anything that moved. Vic watched the skies with dread and asked if this was the end, but Jack stood up, took a strip of animal fat, wrapped it around a branch, lit it like a torch, and pointed toward the north ridge, where stone outcroppings bent inward like the ribs of a dead titan. We move now, he said, and Vic followed without asking. They ran through the storm, dodging bursts of flame, avoiding rivers that hissed and screamed as acid met stone. Jack leapt over cracks. Vic followed, slipping once and nearly falling, but the human caught him one-handed, pulled him up without slowing, and kept going. Their path twisted through canyons filled with bones, through trees that bled when touched, through fields that screamed when stepped on, but they reached the shelter just before the sky broke. The fire came down like rain, turning the jungle into a field of shadows and smoke. But inside the rib cave, the two survivors crouched and listened to the world die outside. As Jack carved new weapons, and Vic stared in silence, no longer asking how or why. Outside, the firestorm raged for hours, and the galaxy watched in horror, not just for the violence, but for the fact that the human was still alive. Feeds flickered with heat maps, showing a single warm shape deep inside the cave, while all other life vanished. The Zorkai cursed and spat and ordered the next escalation, but across the stars others were speaking quietly in forums and markets and homes, asking how a man from Earth had done what no army could, how he had endured without warships or armor, or when the fire stopped, the arena was ash, the trees gone, the rivers bone dry, the air thick with poison. But Jack emerged covered in soot, carrying Vec on his back, both alive, both breathing, and he did not roar or raise a fist. He simply walked forward toward the heart of the arena, as if daring it to try harder. The Zorkai responded by releasing the ash serpent, a creature of myth 100 meters long, with eyes like black suns and skin made of molten glass. It had killed armies, broken cities, and now it slithered through the ruins toward the human and the Lenari, and the galaxy held its breath. Vic tried to speak, but Jack raised a hand and pointed toward a ridge of broken metal bones, where the creature would pass, and then he moved fast, faster than before, setting traps of gas and bone, building a spear with a blade of shattered crystal, covering it in poison sap and fire dust. And as the serpent approached, hissing like a god of ruin, Jack lit the trap with a snap of his fingers, and the sky exploded again, this time from within the ground. As buried fuel cells detonated, shaking the entire field, the serpent roared, its glass hide cracking from the shock, and then Jack leapt, landing on its neck, stabbing downward again and again until the head twisted and fell silent. The cameras caught everything, even the ones the Zorkai tried to shut off, and across the stars a new chant began, not of violence or fear, but of awe, not in Jack's name, but in humanity's, as if something ancient had awakened in the blood of every species who watched and felt for the first time that they too could rise, that they too could stand and fight and win, even against the impossible. That night Vic sat beside Jack, no longer a shadow, but a student, asking questions, learning how to build, how to hunt, how to think like a human. And Jack taught him, not with long speeches, but with quiet hands and calm strength. And as stars fell across the sky like tears, the death world rested for a moment, and the galaxy felt it, not silence, but change, a shift in the order of things. The Zorkai had ruled with fear, but now fear had found a name, and that name was Earthlings. Far away in a golden palace, the supreme Zorkai warlord stared into a black mirror. His claws clenched, his breath shallow, and he whispered to the void, "Bring me this human alive or dead. I will see what makes them unbreakable." And in the cave, Jack looked up as if he heard the words, and simply smiled, sharpening a new blade made from the fang of a god that no longer breathed. The fifth day began with silence, not the calm kind, but the heavy one before thunder, when every leaf, every shadow, every breath feels like a scream waiting to happen. Jack woke with the same cold stare, the same steady movements, checking traps, sharpening edges, stitching a cut across his arm. With threads pulled from his own uniform, Vic sat nearby, watching, not in fear anymore, but with growing purpose, copying what he saw, learning not just to survive, but to become something more. The sky above was darker than usual, veiled in thick green clouds, and the air buzzed with energy unnatural and deep. The death world had changed since Jack arrived, or perhaps it was Jack who had changed it, bending the rules by refusing to break. Zorkai knew time was running out and pride was crumbling. They could no longer hide behind spectacle or cruelty. Their enemy was not a beast to be hunted, but a fire to be reckoned with. So they sent their last weapon into the arena, not a monster, not a machine, but one of their own, the warlord of flame, the breaker of stars, the champion who had never lost a battle, whose very name made species surrender without a fight. General Zarek, a being twice the height of a man, covered in obsidian armor with veins of glowing magma and a blade forged in black hole fire. He descended onto the death world in a chariot of thunder, splitting the clouds. As the galaxy watched, holding its breath, the council whispered that this would end it. The human would kneel or die, and either way order would be restored. Jack stood facing the wind, feeling it shift, knowing something worse was coming. The air trembled as the warlord landed, carving a crater into the ground. His footsteps made the earth bleed, and when he looked at Jack, he did not speak, only raised his blade in silent challenge. The two stood like statues, fire dancing between them, as Vec hid behind the ruins, eyes wide with terror and awe. And then, without warning, the warlord charged, swinging his blade with the power of a collapsing sun. Jack moved with speed born from desperation, dodging under the strike and countering with a flash of bone spear, but the weapon shattered on contact with the armor, and Jack was thrown back, crashing into the ash and stone, coughing blood. But not giving up, never giving up, the warlord approached slowly, savoring the moment, every step shaking the bones of the world. But Jack was already on his feet, weaponless, but not helpless. Grabbing a shard of broken crystal from the ground, he hurled it like a comet, hitting the warlord in the eye, cracking the mask and making him roar for the first time. The sound shook the sky, and the galaxy roared with it, but not for the warlord, for the human who dared to make a god bleed. The fight turned savage, blades clashing, fists slamming into armor, flames against bone. And yet Jack kept going, using the terrain, setting fires, throwing dust into the warlord's eyes, leading him into narrow ruins where size became weakness and speed became strength. He fought for hours, across the shattered field, through rivers of lava, over cliffs of bone, past the corpses of monsters, until both were bleeding, both exhausted, and yet neither stopped. Vic watched, tears in his eyes, not from fear, but from the raw truth of what he was seeing. Not a fight between warrior and beast, but between belief and arrogance, between a world built on power and a man built on hope. And when the warlord finally cornered Jack beneath a crumbling arch, raised his blade to end it, Jack smiled, not in defeat, but in memory, and whispered something that no one could hear, and Vec would later swear was a name. Then lightning struck the blade, as if the sky itself answered the call, splitting it in two and throwing both warriors apart. Jack rose slowly, pulling the broken half of the warlord's blade from the ground, and with a roar charged, driving it through the gap in the armor left by the earlier strike, piercing flesh and fire, and ending the warlord's reign in a burst of white heat. The galaxy screamed in disbelief, the feeds shook, the stars flickered, and on every world where people had once feared the Zorkai, now they cheered, not for death, not for blood, but for the idea that no tyrant is eternal, no throne is unbreakable, and no power can last forever. When faced with a human who refuses to kneel, Jack stood over the fallen body, breathing hard, covered in burns and blood, as Vec ran to him, holding a canister of water and words of awe. But Jack only nodded, touched the small alien's shoulder, and looked to the sky above, where ships had begun to descend, not warships, but observers, diplomats, seekers of peace and answers. The death world had become a beacon, not of war, but of truth. And the truth was, this Earth was no longer a forgotten world on the edge of maps. It was now the center of a new hope. Far above, in the halls of the Zorkai Council, silence reigned. Their strongest had fallen, their myths shattered, and their pride broken, and as the screen dimmed, One elder rose and spoke a single sentence, "Let them speak, for the galaxy has found its voice." And its voice sounds human, and in the ruins Jack sat by the fire with Vec beside him, not smiling, not celebrating, just resting, knowing that the fight was not the end, but the beginning. And across the stars beings of every kind looked to the skies, wondering what other truths Earth might bring next. Fires of the fifth day still smoldered across the death world, as Jack sat quietly under the twisted skeleton of a fallen tree with Vec asleep at his side. The small alien clutched a piece of burnt hide as if it were a blanket, and the night sky above them shimmered with colors no human had ever seen, stars blinking in patterns that spoke to species who had lived for eons longer than Earth. And yet now those same species looked to Earth for answers, not from fear, but from awe. Jack's body ached. His burns throbbed with every heartbeat. His breath came slow but steady, and in his eyes, the same steady fire burned, the one that had survived everything thrown at him and refused to break. In the Zorkai capital, the council chambers were still for the first time in living memory. No shouts, no threats, only silence broken by the slow tapping of one claw against stone. As the Supreme Warlord listened to the final reports, his warlord champion had fallen, his arena torn apart, his fear games undone. By a man with no armor, no rank, no empire, and yet across the stars beings chanted the name of Earth. As if it were a legend born overnight, the council demanded revenge, others whispered surrender. And somewhere in between, the Supreme Warlord spoke, with a voice that made the walls tremble, "Bring the human to me, not as a prisoner, not as a foe, but as a guest. I must understand what force walks inside his bones." At dawn, a ship descended toward the arena, not sleek or armored, but diplomatic white, with banners of unity trailing in its wake. It landed in silence, and a delegation emerged, tall, thin creatures with silver eyes, robes flowing, and hands raised in peace. They approached Jack with no guards, only respect, and spoke in 100 languages at once until one matched his, and they said, "The galaxy awaits your voice. Will you come with us? Will you speak not as a champion, but as a symbol?" And Jack stood slowly, every movement stiff from pain, but he nodded, not for glory, not for pride, but because he knew this moment was bigger than him. And Vic followed, clutching his hand, like a child would hold the hand of a star. They boarded the ship and rose through the clouds, leaving behind the bones of monsters and the ashes of an empire, flying past moons and stars and warships that once pointed at Earth, now turning away in shame or wonder. They arrived at the galactic core, a place where no human had ever set foot before, a station the size of a planet where the most powerful beings gathered in towers that touched artificial suns and cities that floated on magnetic clouds. Here in the center of the galaxy, the fate of trillions was decided by whispers and deals, and for the first time a human walked among them, not as a subject, but as a speaker. Jack entered the Hall of Verdicts, a chamber older than many planets, carved from obsidian and filled with lightless flame. Every species had a seat, but all turned toward the center, where he stood alone, no translator, no armor, no script, only silence waiting. And when he spoke, his voice was rough, low, but steady, and he said, "I did not come to win. I did not come to fight. I came to survive, and in surviving I found something worth more than power. I found truth, and truth is that fear cannot rule forever, not in the heart, not in the stars, not in the soul." The chamber was silent, and then questions poured in from every direction. How did you defeat monsters without weapons? How did you resist the blood ritual? What drives a species like yours? And Jack answered, not with pride, but with stories. He spoke of Earth, of storms and hunger, of mothers who raised children in broken cities, of fathers who worked 3 jobs and still smiled, of people who had less and gave more, of friends who died saving others, of love that bloomed in chaos and hope that rose in ruins. He told them that humanity was not strong because of its weapons, but because of its will, not powerful because of muscle, but because of memory. He spoke of pain and laughter, and the way humans told stories around fire, not to forget the dark, but to honor it, to rise above it, to learn from it. And across the chamber, ancient beings wept for the first time in centuries, because they had forgotten that survival was not just about dominance, it was about meaning. And they voted then not to crown him, not to follow him, but to listen. And in listening, they began to change. Treaties were rewritten, wars paused, alliances shifted, and Earth was no longer ignored. It was invited, not as a junior voice, but as a partner. Back on the death world, the jungle began to grow again. The beasts that remained no longer hunted, but wandered as if searching for something lost. And Vic's people, the Lenari who had hidden for so long, began to emerge from their shattered ships and build new homes beside the rivers, beside the trees. And in their walls they carved images of a man with fire in his eyes and kindness in his hand, not a god, not a warrior, just a man who survived and showed others how. And Jack, he returned to Earth, not with medals or crowns, but with scars that told stories and eyes that had seen more than most could dream, and he lived quietly teaching children how to build traps from sticks, how to tell stories from stars, how to light fires, even when the wood is wet, and across the stars whenever a species felt weak or broken. They would look toward the pale blue dot on the edge of the galaxy, and whisper not in fear, but in hope. The humans came, they saw, they endured, and because they did so, Kenworthy stars over Earth pulsed gently in the quiet of night. As Jack stood once again on the soil that had raised him, a small field on the edge of a forest where wind moved through the tall grass, and the trees whispered secrets older than history. The world had changed since he left, but it still felt familiar. The air still smelled like rain. The birds still sang their morning songs. The rivers still followed the curves of mountains that had seen millions of sunrises. But now Earth was no longer unknown, no longer forgotten by the stars. Now it was written into the maps of empires, spoken of in chambers where laws of galaxies were forged, and it was all because one man had walked through fire and darkness and never stopped moving forward. In every corner of the galaxy, stories of the Death World spread not as tales of violence, but as lessons of children of hundreds of species played games pretending to be the human who faced the warlord with no armor. Alien artists painted murals of Jack standing under red skies with Vec at his side. Schools added human history to their teachings, not as conquerors, but as survivors. And the Zorkai, once feared across every system, had rewritten their laws. No more death arenas, no more blood games. They now offered treaties, offered peace, offered apology. Not because they were forced, but because they had been shown a better way. Jack didn't seek reward. He lived quietly in a cabin near the edge of the lake where he grew his own food, helped fix his neighbors' fences, and taught local kids how to climb trees and tie knots. He didn't talk much about what had happened unless someone truly wanted to know, and even then he told it as if it belonged to someone else. Not to a hero, but to a man who had simply refused to give up. One boy once asked him, "Were you scared?" And Jack had smiled and said, "Yes, but I kept walking, and that was enough." Vic visited often now, an ambassador of his people, dressed in robes woven with symbols of Earth, always bringing stories from across the stars about how other worlds were healing, how wars were ending, how people were choosing conversation over conquest because they had seen a man stand alone against giants and survive. And in those visits, Vic always brought something strange, a fruit from a moon. Jack had never seen a tool shaped like music, a stone that glowed with memories, and Jack would sit with him on the porch sipping tea and listening without speaking much, because the listening mattered more than the speaking. One day a ship arrived, not loud, not grand, just simple gray metal with no markings, and when it landed, a woman stepped out, not human, not Zorkai, but something else. Her skin shimmered like silver sand. Her eyes held centuries, and she walked with the calm of someone who had seen entire empires rise and fall. She introduced herself as a scholar from the archive of forgotten truths, and she said, "I came because I wanted to meet the man who made the galaxy remember its soul." And Jack looked at her with quiet eyes and said, "I just survived." And she replied, "Sometimes that's all the galaxy needs, a reminder that it's possible." They spoke for hours by the lake about the things no one puts into history books, about the loneliness between victories, about the quiet after screams, about how hard it is to hold onto yourself when everyone wants you to be something more. And she asked him if he regretted it, and he said, "No, not once. But sometimes I wish someone else had gone, someone younger, someone stronger, someone who could have come back without so many ghosts." And she said, "The ghosts only follow the brave, because only the brave dare to walk where they live." As the sun set that evening, Jack walked down to the water, his reflection rippling in the calm surface, and he closed his eyes, listening to the wind, listening to the earth, and he thought of the jungle, of the beasts, of the fire, of the warlord, and of Vec, who had once been a frightened creature, now standing tall across councils and chambers. Because courage was not about size or strength, but about heart, and Jack knew now that even in the darkest places, a single light could change everything. Stars came out one by one above him, blinking gently like old friends watching from far away, and somewhere in the galaxy, a young girl stared at the same stars holding a book titled Earth Legends, and she whispered, "One day I'll be brave like the human." And on a distant planet, two former enemies shook hands beneath a banner that read "Unity forged in fire." And on a moon colony, a child drew with chalk a figure with no crown, no weapon, just a smile, and underneath it wrote, "The man who walked through monster sand back on Earth." Jack sat beside the fire outside his cabin, Vic humming beside him as sparks floated into the sky. And for a moment everything was still, everything was quiet, and in that quiet was peace, not the kind bought by war or demanded by strength, but the kind earned by surviving, by choosing kindness when cruelty was easier, by standing when falling would have been simpler and the galaxy remembered. Deathworlder beasts had once ruled by fear, but fear had met a man from Earth, and that man had not flinched, and so fear learned to kneel not before power but before courage. And though Jack would never call himself a hero, never carve his name into stone, the stars had already done it for him, written in silence across every sky, that remembers what it means to be human. Years passed like wind through tall grass, quiet and unstoppable, and the galaxy kept turning, stars kept burning, and life kept growing. But in the corners where shadows once ruled, light now bloomed, not because armies rose, but because stories spread, the story of the human who walked alone through fire, who faced monsters and memories and came back whole, not untouched but unbroken. And across 1,000 worlds his name was spoken, not with fear, not with worship, but with respect. They called him the quiet fire, the last man standing, the one who showed them all that survival was not the end, but the beginning on Earth. The seasons turned as they always had. Rain fell, sun rose, snow came and melted. But now ships moved gently in the sky above, not for war, not for invasion, but for learning, for healing, for connection. Earth had become a beacon, not of power but of possibility. And in the forest by the lake where the trees still danced in the breeze, Jack's cabin stood. Still, smoke curling from the chimney. Children came sometimes to hear his stories, not of battles or beasts but of decisions and silence, and the strength found in choosing mercy when rage would be easier. And each time he finished he would say the same words: I walked because someone had to, I survived because others could not, and I kept going because the world was watching. Vec became a leader, not of armies but of ideas. His voice was soft but carried weight, and when he spoke of Jack he spoke not of a warrior but of a man who made him believe in more than fear. He visited often, still bringing gifts from new allies, plants that sang, minerals that glowed, stories written in colors Jack had never seen, and they would sit under the stars and speak of everything and nothing until the fire went cold and the world went quiet. Aganon evening, as the sky turned to velvet and the moon lit the lake like silver glass, Jack stood at the edge of the water, his reflection calm, his breath steady, and he felt it in his bones, the shift, the quiet end of a journey, not because he was finished, but because the path behind him had already grown into a road for others to follow. He closed his eyes and smiled, not for himself, but for every life that had grown brighter, because he refused to let darkness win. Some say he walked into the forest and vanished. Some say he became part of the stars. Some say he still walks the galaxy, one step ahead of fear, teaching it what it means to be human. But the truth is written not in stone or books, but in every hand that helps without asking, every voice that rises for the weak, every choice made in silence when no one is watching. And those choices, those small brave choices, are how legends become real. And across the stars and places where hope was once a dream, they now tell the story of the human who faced the worst the galaxy had, and answered not with hate, not with fire, but with heart. And